So in this part of the tutorial, we'll start looking at how we can take our materials and use them to craft some specific items. And we will be using the crafting bench to make these items. But before we write the actual code, I would like to take a moment to explain you what a dictionary is, because the dictionary is that kind of collection we'll be using to add this functionality to our game. So you don't need to do what I'm doing right now, because I'm gonna open a new Visual Studio project, just a simple console C# project, and I'm going to use this project to demonstrate what a dictionary is and how it works, because I think it's going to be easier for you guys to understand what we're doing if I'm going to show you a simple example before we actually start adding it to the tutorial. So here you can simply just lean back and watch what I'm doing, and then try to understand what it is. So I'm going to make a new project, simply going to call it console application. Okay. So first of all, we need to add the dictionary to our project, and the dictionary is inside this system collection.generics namespace. So if I would remove this from the top of my file and try to write dictionary, then I won't be able to find the dictionary because it's inside this namespace up here. So in our Unity project, we will have to add this namespace called system.collections.generic, which is up here. So now when I write down here dictionary, you'll see that it pops up here. Okay, so a dictionary is a collection, and a collection is something where you can put more objects in. For example, we already have a list in our game that that we're using for our slots. So we have a list in our game that we're using for slots, for example. We can just write it here so we can remember. And we are using a stack, which is another collection that we are using for our items inside our slot. So these two kind of collections is something that we are already using. And right now we have to use a third collection called the dictionary. And the dictionary is very different from the list and very different from the stack, because a dictionary uses something called a hash key to find the items inside the dictionary. So whenever we define our dictionary, we'll have to add a key value pair, is what it's called. So a key and a value is something we need to add. The key is where we need to look for something inside the dictionary, and the value is the value we're going to store in the dictionary. So basically, when we craft an item, we would need to translate whatever we have in our crafting bench. Let's say we have some wood and some stone. We need to translate that into an item, and we can use that signature of those items in the crafting bench to find a specific item inside our dictionary. So basically we need to translate the items in the crafting bench into a string so that we can use that string to look in our dictionary. And it's basically kind of the same thing we're doing when we're saving and loading our inventory, because when we're saving and loading, well, then we are taking everything inside the inventory, translating it into a string, saving it in our memory, and then we're loading it later as a string and creating items from that string we just made. So without further ado, let's create the dictionary. And as you can see, when I open this one up, this bracket here, you'll see that I can give in a key and a value type. And T means type, which means that generic, which means that I can define what kind of key I want and what kind of value type I want. So this means I can use an integer as a key. So for example, I can store something under the value 0 or the value 3 or something. Or I can use a string as a key. So I can store something under cat or dog or whatever in the dictionary. So in my example, I'm simply going to say I'm going to store, use an integer as the key value. And the value I want to store in there should be a string, for example. And I'm just going to call this test equals new dictionary. Okay, so now I have created a dictionary which uses an integer as the key value and a string as the value. This means that I would be able to say, well, test dot add. And when we add something, we need to store the key that we want to use for storing something. So the key I would like to store would be, for example, let's say we have some we have some program where we need to store names in, and we need to store them under a social security number of a person, for example. So under the social security number, I would use, let's say social security number is 123456. That's this guy's social security number, and his name is John. So now we know whenever we try to access this dictionary with the key value 123456, we will get John returned, so that we just look John up. We could also make a class or something and add here. In our case, in our game, we will have to use the content of our crafting bench here, and we will have to return an item here, but this is just a simple example. So why is it that we're using a dictionary over a list, for example? Well, first of all, we can save something like this with a key value pair, and some of you might think, well, we could just make some new class that contains the blueprint for creating a specific item and then return the item as well. Well, we could also do that and add it to a list, but the thing is that a dictionary is actually way faster than a list to find something in when you need to store something like this, because of this value here, this key here over here, because this key is actually translated into a hash key that your computer will be using to find the specific name John, which means when you say add here, this 123456 12456 will be translated into some kind of hash key like this or something, right? So every time it accesses the dictionary through this code here, it will translate into this hash key so that it knows where to look for it inside the dictionary. So this one will be, for example, translated into a number like this by using the function called getHashKey. It might seem a little bit complicated, but think as this key value as something the computer or your program takes in, translates it to something it can remember. So every time it gets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it knows that it needs to look under the hash key, this for example. So when I will have to get the name, like string name for example, and I would set it equal to test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like this, well, then it will return John for me because I asked it for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it translates that into the hash key here, and it knows that under this hash key it needs to return John, so it just returns John into the name. So if I would do console.writeLine name, well, then you'll see that it writes John in my console here because it's stored under this specific number. So why is it faster than a list? Well, let's say that we had more. For example, we had we also had 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, and we had Joe there, and then we had 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, and then we had Marie or something under that one. So this one will be translated into another hash key, and this one will be translated. Into a third hash key. So when it looks this up, so if we had a list and we had to find a specific name, let's say that we made another list down here with names, let's say string. It's called names. Yes, okay. So we have this list here with names, and we would have to look through names for all these if we did names.add. Sorry if I'm mumbling a little, I'm just thinking when I do this. If I could names.add, just gonna add the same names here. John, and we have Joe and Marie. Just going to do it in one-liners here. Okay, so we have John, Joe, and Marie, and we have to find one of these inside the names list, which will be way slower. If we do names.find, don't even have link using system.link, or actually we can actually do it another way. If we would make it for each loop like this, and called string n in names, and if name n equals John, for example, then we can write console.writeLine n. So we outcome this one up here and run the code again. See, we also get John out, but up here we're simply giving it the exact name we're looking for, or this exact key we're looking for, so it finds the hash key and finds it directly inside the dictionary. Here we have to say, well, now John is the first one, but John might as well be the last one if we would switch these two. So it would have to go to the first spot and say, well, is this the one we're looking for? No. Is this the one we're looking for? No. Well, is this the one we're looking for? Yes, it is. And then it writes it out to the console. So we have to run through everything in our list. So imagine that you have a list with thousands of names in it, and the number or the name you're looking for is one of the last numbers, like 995 name. And then you will have to run through all 994 names before that to find the last name. But if you have a dictionary, you'll simply just punch in the key you're looking for. It will look up the hash key and it will go directly into the collection and find that specific name under that hash key. So that's a bit of an explanation of why a dictionary might be faster in this in these circumstances. Another thing which is very important is that the key value here needs to be unique. You can't add two keys with the same value, because we need to generate an unique hash key. So if I would do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 like this, and I would run my program, I'll get an exception, as you can see here, because this key already exists, and I'm trying to use a key that already exists, and I get like an item with the same key already has been added. So I'm not able to add more keys. I would have to change this key here to something else to be able to add Joe to the collection. So that was like a short explanation of what a dictionary is and how it works. And my point is that we need to translate something from our graph bench into a string here, and then we need to add an item over here so that we can give in a string with the correct construction here, so that we can return a specific item. So let's have a look at how we can do this. I hope this is not confusing. I hope it makes sense. If it doesn't make 100% sense, it's okay. Just follow along here, and I'm pretty sure you'll understand it by the end of this tutorial when we have added the right functionality here. Okay, so we just stated that we need to using system.collections.generic to use it. And up here we need to create our dictionary. So we're going to make a private dictionary, and it needs to take in a string, and it needs to return an item, and we're going to call it crafting items. Dictionary, it's not a list. There we go. String item. Okay, so here we have our dictionary for all our items. So we need to translate this somehow, and we would have to translate our material inside our crafting bench to a string. So let's create a new function under here, public void create blueprints. So we're just going to call them blueprints, all these things we put in. For example, 2 stones and 1 wood, for example, to be able to create a axe or something. So how are we going to do this? Well, let's have a look in Unity, because it's going to be easier to explain out here. If I open up my crafting bench here and I pick up some items, let's see what we have. Yes. So let's say that we need to add 1 stone here, not stone, not one iron and one iron, and then a piece of wood here in the bottom to be able to craft a sword. Well, then our string should be named empty, iron, empty, empty, iron, empty, empty, wood, empty, if you understand what I mean. So we need to translate it into that, so that we know when we get a string that's called empty, iron, empty, empty, iron, empty, empty, wood, empty, then we need to create a sword. So let's create a blueprint just like that by saying crafting items dot add empty dash empty dash what's it called, not empty, empty iron, sorry, dash empty dash iron dash empty dash wood. Okay, I'm lost here. Empty iron, empty iron, empty, empty. As a wood. Okay, I'm totally getting ahead of myself here. Okay, let's try again. Empty with capital letters. Our iron is named with small letters, so iron like this. Then we're gonna make a dash again and write empty. We're gonna make a dash again and write empty. One more dash and then it's iron. One more dash and then it's empty. One more dash, then it's empty. Then it's wood. And then it's empty. And our wood is also not with capital. Just like this. Okay, so that's the key. This is the signature we need to be able to make our weapon. And of course we also need a dash in the end here, because I'm gonna make a dash in the end when I generate this string. We haven't generated it yet, but we'll do that in a minute. So first slot is empty, next one is iron, then there's an empty one, next line is empty, then there's an iron, empty, next line is empty, then we have a piece of wood and empty. Okay, so that is our signature or blueprint for creating a weapon. Next thing we need to do is to get the correct weapon, and we need to find it inside our items container. So we say inventory manager dot instance dot item container equipment dot find, and then we're going to make a lambda expression. Every time we find something in equipment, we're going to call it x, and if x dot item name equals awesome sword. Oh, I can't spell apparently. Then we're going to return it or add it. So we're adding it right here. Here we're adding it to crafting items so that we can find it later. And remember, it is very important that you write the correct name here. If you don't write this correct, if this is not a capital letter, for example, then it might not find your sword inside the collection. So this name here really has to reflect the name that you have written inside your items here. So for example, if I find my weapons, if I could find anything, boots, the weapons in the top, I think, two-hand, yeah, main hand here. Here I have the name awesome sword, as you can see here. If I wouldn't write it exactly the same way as I do here, then I won't be able to find it in my craft bench here. So remember, this is very important. If you can't find the item, then it might be the name you have written wrong. Okay, so I would also like to add the helmet as we had before. For example, you can of course add your own items, but I'm simply just going to add the same ones as I demonstrated in the beginning. So crafting items dot add empty, empty, empty. So it's empty in the top row. Then I'm going to have a stone and a stone and a stone. And the next row I'm going to have one stone and then an empty slot and then one more stone and a dash. And I simply need to find the same thing almost, so I can just copy this, paste it underneath, and then I am looking for instead of looking for my sword, I'm going to look for strong helmet. I think that's what I called it. Yes, okay. So now I can craft two items. I can craft a helmet and I can craft a sword. So now that we have created our blueprints, so this means that whenever you need to make a new item that is available for crafting, you should just add a new line to this function here, and then you can just add in new items if you need to craft new items. So let's try to make a button for crafting items. So public void craft item. So this function is kind of going to look like our save load function, but it's going to be a little different. So string output equals string.empty. So this is the string that we are going to save our craft items in. So when we click the craft item button, we are going to translate this, the content of this one, into a string, and this is exactly what we're doing now. When we click that craft button, this is what is going to happen. Just going to close this one. Give me a sec. There we go. So for each game object in all slots, so we need to be able to access all slots from here so that we can check them out and see if it contains an empty slot or an iron or a wood, for example. So we need to go to our inventory and we need to find our all slots. Here we go. We should go to the definition of it up here. Then you can see it's private. We're just going to make it protected so that we can reach it down there. So save this, and then we are going to jump to our crafting bench again. So in all slots, if let's just call this one slot. So if our slot is empty, sorry, we are not going to do that yet. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's make slot temp equals slot get component slot, just like this. And then we're going to say if our temporary slot. So what we just did is that we're looking through all our slots in our collection called all slots. So all the slots inside the crafting bench. Every time we find a slot, we're going to make a reference to the slots script so that we can access the slot script on the okay, I can't of course play it now because I'm writing code here. Okay, let's try again. So on the slot script, let's say we have our crafting bench here. Here's all the slots. We're going to look through all these slots here. When we find a slot, we're going to access this slot script here. And this is exactly what we're doing right now. So we're accessing the slot script to get a reference to it, and then we're going to say, well, if it is empty, if the slot is empty, well, then we need to say that our output equals empty with capital letters, because we wrote it with capital letters up here, just like that. So if it isn't empty, then we're going to say output plus equals temporary dot current item dot item dot item name to get the correct name plus a dash here, a slash here, so that we get this one in between. And because we do this with the dash in the end here, we also need the dash out here, because when we add a stone as the last thing, we're also going to add this one in the end, and that's the signature, that's the key. So this is the one that's going to be translated into a hash key later. So we can actually test this out by going down here and doing debug.log output, just like that. And then we can save this, jump into Unity. So normally we would just go out here in Unity, find the prefab, and then assign the correct function down here. But that is not possible for us right now because our crafting bench is in the game, and we are not able to take the crafting bench here and drag it all the way down here because it's not a prefab. And we would like to access the function called craft item on the craft on the craft prefab here, so that we can assign it down here. And to be able to do that, we'll actually have to write some code. So if we jump back into our script and go all the way up here under our craft button here, we would have to say craft button that get component button, and we will have to access the onClick event ourselves, because this button here, when we run our game, is equal to this button we have here we're clicking. So we need to access this onClick event here, and we can access the onClick event by writing button dot onClick. So that's the onClick event. Then we need to say, well, we want to add a listener, and the function that should be listening to this button click is the craft item function. So we're going to say add listener and give it the craft item function. There we go. So now we actually just assigned this craft item function to the button click out there, because we weren't able to drag it and then select it here. Normally we just drag stuff around as we do here, and then we select the correct function here, but we're not able to do that in this moment. So save your game, jump back into Unity, and let's clear this and give it a go. So right now we have an empty craft bench, and if I click the create craft button, it returns empty all the way around. If I would pick up some items and maybe take some stone or something, place here, some iron, place here, and a piece of wood and place it here, then it should return iron empty empty, empty stone empty, empty empty wood. So let's clear this one up here and give it a go. Iron empty empty, empty stone empty, empty empty wood. So now you can see that we actually just translated what we see here into a string that we can actually use to find a specific item inside our dictionary. So before we add the visual part, so that we can actually craft the item, or we can see the item we're crafting, well, then we can add the part where we're actually crafting it, so we get it into our inventory. But I think I'm going to wrap this part up. It's getting kind of long. It's more than half an hour now. So we're going to leave this part here, and in the next part we are actually going to craft the item by clicking the craft item button.